Right. Hello, hello. Hi, Fang. Hi, Amelie. How are you?
Hello, doing great.
Hello. That's good. That's good. Welcome. And hey, Fang, can you speak as well? Is your mute?
Hello,
Is your mic
hello.
working? Hello. Awesome. Great. Nice to have you all. I think we're gonna get started. It's just gonna be us hanging out, which is gonna be fun.
Yeah,
Um, but
adding it to the record.
exactly, that's right. We need to do that exactly, adding it to the record. But this is actually really special for us. So Fang and I, just to kind of kick things off, Fang and I met at Kernel. Kernel is a community that we describe ourselves, I guess, as a Web3 learning community, but a community that's really learning how to be intentional and create spaces of care within the Web3 space, and just really a safe space for builders of all, all types, kind of to come and talk and learn and build with each other. It's a really beautiful space, and actually, all of us kind of met there. Emily too. That's how we kind of came to meet you as well. So this is kind of a spaces or a series of conversations that has borne out of our experiences with Kernel. Fang and I met there, and we wanted to start just like a monthly conversation where we were able to bring all the amazing people and ideas that we encountered in Kernel into into the broader world, to share them, and also just create like a platform for people to talk and ask questions, because there's just so many interesting things happening. So yeah, that's kind of the context for What If, and the reason why we called it What If is, for us, we really feel like we're at a time where it's time for like really deep reimagining of the world. And the way that really starts is by asking really tough questions sometimes, and questions like, well, what if we just did X or just didn't do X? What would happen? So we like to start each conversation with like a broad what if question to kind of lead us. The other thing with these monthly conversations is we've timed them to the new moon. So today is actually the November new moon. And the reason we did that is because the new moon, it all marks the start of a new cycle, and is always a great time for manifesting, for kind of doing that deep imagining work, and like really setting intentions for the next cycle or what's beyond, a time to like let go and move on. And I wanted to just share a few words about this new moon from Sister Tawa, who's also a dear friend from the Kernel community, who posted earlier today about what this moon means in November. So what she said was, celebrating the end of a chaotic eclipse season, the spontaneity loving influence of November. And yes, it was so chaotic this month. The new moon and accompanying planetary alignments heralds a time of magic, manifestation, celebration, expansion, enthusiasm, and cheerfulness. It's time to connect with your future dreams and ideals, embrace the big picture, seek higher knowledge, pursue greater aspirations, prioritize broader perspectives, take risks, and break out of your comfort zone. However, keep the flexibility of being able to change your mind and resist making rash or hasty decisions. This new cycle welcomes the gorgeous new beginnings. Embrace your inner adventurer, and set yourself free. So I think that's a really beautiful from Sister. And yeah, definitely a chaotic last few weeks, which I think is also a great time for us to have this conversation with Amelie, who is one of the founders, or I should say Muse of Tragedy, as Amelie calls herself, we're going to get into that and what you mean by that shortly, Amelie, of Alexandria Labs. And Alexandria Labs is a really incredible project that is all about, I guess, like, what if we could create the next great Library of Alexandria? And what does that mean for reading, browsing, publishing, bringing books on chain? How does this kind of change the relationship between readers and writers, and communities around storytelling? I think there's just so much potential, and I'm going to be sharing a bit about Alexandria Lab, but also going on this conversation journey with us about, what does it mean to rebuild the Library of Alexandria? And how could we do that? How would that influence us? What would the impact be? So maybe, Emily, we could just start. Do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about the project?
Yeah. And thank you so much for that beautiful introduction on this special new moon. Let's see. So yeah, I'm Amelie. My co-founder Sonia and I started this project because we are both writers and have both written books before, but hadn't published them for various reasons, mostly because we didn't like the publishing options that were available, both like traditional publishing and self-publishing. And so and then kind of about a year ago, we both started learning about Web3 and seeing it as a potential solution for making publishing more pleasant, giving authors more control over their work, making ebooks like these like special artifacts that can be enjoyed more than they normally are. And so that's kind of how we started it. There was a lot of like exploring and imagining, and that's where kind of where the Muse thing came from. This mythos that we were creating of like, okay, what if we took our name from the Library of Alexandria, like what if the ancient muses had returned in order to like try to revive the Library of Alexandria in the digital age with this new technology? What would that look like? So, and it's also just fun.
Thank you so much for that.
I love that.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Amelie. You and I actually also met in person early this year in New York City.
Yeah.
And I kind of remember just meeting you and then you talking about like, what you wanted to start. And then I remember going through Kernel, KB5, and then just like reading all your different posts that you shared on Alexandria Labs. And I was just wondering if, we talk about the Great Library of Alexandria, and I was just wondering, like, what are kind of like those elements that speak so much to you about the Library of Alexandria that propel you to name this project Alexandria Labs?
Yeah. I love that question. It's kind of a nuance, like our understanding of the history. But we know that like when you look at history, often like history of Western civilization, there are not always the way things have been represented to us are not always correct, right? So I don't know what the Library of Alexandria was actually like, what it was actually like to go and study there, who was included there, but the kind of the ideals of it, what it wanted to be and what it did achieve, we are very inspired by and are hoping to kind of take the positives from that we can. So like the idea of that this library and was kind of a magnet for scholars from around the world to come together. This idea of like diversity of thought, of like let's make a place where people can come and like exchange ideas. And apparently, from what I've read, like having this library here actually did like draw people and create like new trade routes and turn this into like a vibrant city because it was this like intellectual hub, which I think is very cool. And so that's like the social aspect of it, but then also the collecting of records and of like many world cultures being preserved here. That is also I think that's the main thing that inspires us. Like what happens when you just try to collect things and also make them accessible, because you can't just collect things, you also have to make them able to be searched and able to have information retrieved so that people can actually learn from them. And then of course there's we all like when we think of the Library of Alexandria, we think of it burning, which actually didn't happen in like one big burning, which is definitely the impression that I had until I read more about it. It was more like a series of different things, kind of like falling into disrepair, like getting sometimes like looted. Sometimes there would just be like budget problems where it just wasn't being well maintained. And then yes, there were some burnings over decades where eventually just the library just was no longer what it used to be. And that also to me is almost like more sad than one burning, like that. Yeah. And so we're inspired by that too, like its end and sort of like what would happen if it were revived.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that story. And actually, when I first heard the name too, I have this. You know what? It's like funny. I have this image of the burning Library of Alexandria, probably from
Yeah.
some dramatization. But
Mm-hmm.
you're so right. Like it's like they're falling into disrepair, looted. Like just like that lack of maintenance of like a record. And I do really love what you said about that it kind of created new trade routes. I think that's super interesting to bring people to the city. As like this real cultural thing. That's really interesting actually. Like libraries today, I think, like I sometimes go to the library to take my baby to the library, because that's like a nice quiet place where they can go and hang out and not have to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say libraries today, like, do you kind of what's your thought about libraries today in general, online or physical, and how is the culture of what libraries used to be, I guess, is that something that you're trying to recreate, or is there parts of it that you want to recreate but parts of it that you want to change in what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I should also say, yeah, I mean, libraries in general also really inspire us. And actually, our very first project that we did to do with this was just a bunch of AI generated pictures of libraries, like these beautiful paintings of like, mythical libraries. Like, what if there was one on a glacier? What if there was one in space? And like, that was because we just love libraries. And Sonia and I would think about like, what does it feel like going into a library? Both like your local library when you're a kid and it's summer and you're just getting a bunch of books, or like a big grand library that you could visit when you're visiting a new city, and what is special about that. And I started to learn about libraries, I discovered that they're really a lot more than just books. They're often cultural centers, but also like social resource centers.
Yeah.
And like, they have support for people who are trying to like get good credit, or find housing, or like places of like people being able to gather, and like you said, it's a place where you don't have to spend money. It's really accessible. It's got air conditioning in the summer. Like it's like it's good for old people and children and students, and it's just, I mean, libraries in that way I think have been the same for maybe all time. I don't know when the first libraries existed, but so we do love those a lot, and we've been thinking about like how can we help make them even better, like what else could they use, and so things like making like digital resources more accessible, and there are already a lot of like platforms that can do that. Like Libby, for example, is great. People always bring up Libby to me, where you can get like audiobooks from your local library, but through this like nice seamless app. But like what does digitizing look like? How can we also support librarians who are often very underappreciated?
Yeah. Whenever I think about libraries, I I have like those memories when I was like a child, and then I went to the library, and it was just like a world of wonder where you could like imagine. Uh, you could open a book and imagine like a whole world that a writer has written in those pages, and kind of get immersed in that, like, just magical world that you just imagine. And I thought it was just like such a, it comes to what we are trying to do here, just like imagine new worlds together, that are different to the ones that we have as of
Totally.
today. And I'm just wondering, like, you've mentioned before, you've written books together with also your co-founder, like Sonia, and you've mentioned that you didn't publish those because of like the structure that the publishing kind of industry has as of today. So I was just wondering if you could like touch upon those a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so Sonia, I would say, went further than I did on like the traditional route. One of her degrees at Princeton was in creative writing, and she worked with a lot of these like authors who had been really successful in the traditional publishing world, who were kind of helping to guide her through when she wrote a memoir. And she just found that like if she were to sign a deal with an agent and try to work with a publishing house, she would be ceding a lot of her control as an author. Her control over what would happen with the book, like what even would it look like at the end of, you know, the editing process, but also like what happens with the IP and the rights. And for me, you know, I didn't go as far. I was looking into the different options. I was looking into like Amazon self-publishing as well, because if you're going to self-publish like Amazon, it seems to be the most obvious option. But they don't provide a lot of like marketing and distribution support. And I remember thinking like, well, I'm an author. Like I don't want to be a marketer also. I don't want to have to like learn that. And so many self-published authors have ended up, that can be very savvy with it and can be really great at it, but it's not necessarily what you want to do. And I think the best example is this author that we talked to, so she had a young adult novel published, and like traditional with a publisher, and it had sold really, really well. And she kept having people asking to get the film rights to it, and trying to work with her publisher. And her publisher was just not, they weren't negotiating very flexibly. And so the deal just never went through. And this was like years of like this maybe happening. Maybe it was going to be like a Hulu special or something. And it just never happening. And she was really disappointed, and it made her really demoralized and feeling like she didn't want to write a new book, because this is what would happen with her book. And so that's what she told me when we were talking about like the ideal that we're trying to build of like, can we help people keep the control over what happens with their book, largely by kind of getting the funding and the support more directly from their readers who love them. Also not necessarily focusing on, a lot of times traditional publishing houses will focus on their bestsellers, because their bestsellers are, and like guaranteed bestsellers, like an author who maybe it's their first book, but they already are famous in some way, or maybe they've just written books that have sold really well before. And they rely on that for a lot of their revenue. But that's not necessarily, like, people don't only like to read bestsellers. It's just that's where the most eyes will go to. But, like, what about the niche audiences? What about the 1,000 true fans for different authors? So I've been wanting to work with authors like that young adult author on, like, how can we help you connect more directly with the readers that really love your work and want to support it and want to support your vision, so that authors can really just write and not have to worry about being marketers and not have to worry about fitting kind of the frameworks of editing and marketability. So yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm wondering too, like, how. So like in the context of that person, of that writer, who had that experience. So she already has an audience. If she had chosen, for example, to publish like on a platform like yours, like Alexandria Labs, and she did have control of the process. How does it work then for her to then do things like negotiate the rights for a film, or use that work, or do things with it? Because like, and maybe you can explain a bit more. Like how Alexandria Labs works from a technical point of view, like bringing the work on chain, and how does that affect things like copyright and IP? And maybe that's a really deep conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, it's something that like, that haven't, I sometimes think like it would be really fun if I were to work in law one day. It would be really fun to work in this area, like Web3 IP, because there's so much that just hasn't been figured out yet. But like, there are a lot of different ways that people are doing it. I think I don't know what's going on with this. I know a project was working on like a copyright just for NFTs that could be written that would like allow people who hold the NFT to have like commercial rights, and like you own something that also means that you own the IP to do things with it. We're not going with that, at least for now. I mean, everything we're doing is experimenting, but for now, what we are doing is more, it's kind of like having the IP of a physical book. So that means that the IP still belongs to the author. You can't write fan fiction and publish it and make money from it, without permission from the author. But it's different from, so with ebooks, the, like, in legal terms, when I buy an ebook on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, kind of the normal way, I'm actually technically just renting it. I don't own it because it's a digital asset that has to belong to a platform because of how it works technically. But with an NFT, what's cool is that I can own it in a way that I can resell it, and I can keep it, and it doesn't matter what platform it's on. It doesn't even need a platform. Like, it's just mine. And I think that's the main thing that's like interesting about the IP. We do want to play around with ways to expand definitions of IP, and that also will be kind of growing and playing with as the NFT world grows on this. But like, it would be really cool to allow authors to license out people making fan art of their work, and for the author to be able to endorse things as part of like the world of their book that other people have made, or maybe even thinking about a book as something that is written collaboratively by lots of different people who all have different like stakes in it. Thinking about what that could look like. I don't exactly know, but I do want to play around with it.
You go, Fang. Yeah, I was going to say collaborative writing was something we wanted to touch on actually, because I think you've done a bit of that work. But yeah, Fang, you go.
No, go for it. I think indeed, like what I was thinking is, indeed, that kind of like changes the power dynamics of kind of like ownership in itself, right? Like, I also find myself buying digital books via Amazon Kindle, and it's very hard for me to port that anywhere else to read,
right?
As a reader. And my relationship with those authors are non-existent. I just admire their work,
right?
And it ends up that, right?
Right.
And
yes,
and I'm just wondering, like, indeed, with what you're trying to do, like, how do you aspire of like changing those power dynamics in terms of like both for the author but also like for knowledge itself?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it I think is about how knowledge is funded. Like, if I as a reader am able to give money directly to an author that I love, maybe as they're writing a book, we call it like writing in public, kind of like building in public. If I were to be able to give that money directly to help the author write, that does kind of change the dynamic, where instead of it being like, okay, the author's been given in advance by a publishing house, and the whole kind of creative process is done kind of under the umbrella of that publishing house. If instead the author is given money by the people who want to read the thing, and want to support them, then that changes the power dynamic, partly by giving the author more power to do things that they want, but also by letting readers kind of directly support the work that they like, and kind of be a part of it, not necessarily in like a speculative way, but in a kind of like genuine, like, I'm supporting. So I am also still occasionally a film critic for this blog called FF2 Media that's focused on supporting women artists. And kind of a big thing that I learned about in learning about like how does art get made, how does art get funded, is that like, what, your ticket is your vote. Like, if you buy a ticket to a gallery show or a ticket to a film being released, you are directly supporting that thing, and you can really think about it as kind of like your civic duty to like support the kind of art that you want to see more of. And I think that if we could do that with books, both for fiction, like the art that we want to see, but also for nonfiction and academic books, like what's the information that we want to support? What are the voices that we want to support? What are the kinds of things we care about learning about? I think that could be kind of revolutionary.
Yeah, that's a huge idea actually, and like, yeah, like really, like how can a community generate content and support that content, right? Like,
Yeah.
so like to your point about there's a topic that people are really interested in, or a particular story. Like I love this idea of like fan fiction being part of, say, like it, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
you know, like it's like, does fan fiction need to be fan fiction, or is fan fiction become like an extension of the story that now can be kind of like recognized by the author and connected and validated in a way, like more like a big group writing project or thing, which is also really interesting, right? Because I think, you know, there's so much like, yeah, and I love fan fiction. I love like all the, you know, like all these kind of like sci-fi stories that create these epic universes that just like invite you in, and to, like, you get sucked into the story. But imagine if you could get sucked in and write and be kind of part of that world building. That's super cool. And then on the topics point of view, like, yeah, like if a community is really focused on like a topic, or they're really concerned about something, could they help fund other people in that community to write about that topic and generate that content?
Yeah, it's also, I mean, so we all, the three of us, met through Kernel, and I feel like Kernel is such a beautiful example. Like, they're already doing this. It doesn't need technology to enable it. Like, technology can augment it, right, and let you do cool new things, but like, they are using existing tools. Actually, I know Kernel's building some of their own tools, which is awesome. But like, using things like Slack to just, it's a place where people are sharing things. Like, we are, you know, there are the people who curate Kernel and kind of make it what it is every cohort, but also if you are part of Kernel, you feel invited to also educate or also create experiences for other people. Like, we're encouraged to run conversations or like give talks or just like share resources with each other. And, you know, like Glenn and Rory, who I know we're all friends with, are like working on this idea of like curation, and like, can we curate the things that we love for other people as a form of care. And so that I'm very inspired by that, which is like, you know, it already exists. It doesn't.
Yeah. I have one follow-up question to that then. Why do you think then, why do you feel like you would like to use Web3 technology to build then, with all this stuff that existing? What do you think makes, why do you want to bring this on chain? What's like the level up that it gives us?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's the financial aspect, which I've already been talking about, of like directly supporting authors, of and then that fact of like that I can actually own an ebook in the same way that I can a physical book, but also maybe in different ways where new things could happen with the IP, new things could happen with like how it's valued. But then there's also these kind of more I don't know how to call them, like ideological like facts of the technology. Like, if you have books that are on the permaweb and stored in a decentralized way, then they are safe from burning, right? In a way that even ebooks are not, where like if I lose access to my Amazon account, I lose access to my ebooks. If Amazon decides that they don't want a book anymore because of whatever like political reasons or something, they can get rid of it. And I have no say, even if I were the author. And well, things like censorship, I think, is very frightening with ebooks, because you can change digital files, but if they're stored on chain, or if they're protected on chain in some way, you can't in the same way. There's always going to be a public record if something's been changed. And so that, I think, there's this big like kind of societal level importance to that, permanence, like impermeability of information. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me, it's such a important historical theme that has been done across many centuries, whereby the first thing that one does, or like one empire conquers another one, is to burn books, and to ensure that knowledge gets lost, to be able to build upon new ideas or ideologies, or change those ideologies, so that information or knowledge cannot be transferred from one citizen to another, which it is quite important. I'm just
Right.
wondering, like, also like on the flip side, of like, permanence, like having these books on chains. What what scares you about like the potential of Alexandria Labs also?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there's like this fact of books being assets that can be owned, and that because of so often in NFT culture in the past recent years, like there's commonly this kind of stuff, like these collector's items, they can become like points of speculation and points of like kind of creating hype around something. And that, I think, to apply these ideas to books is not ideal. Feels very counter to like what books are about.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, there's a lot of like discussion on Twitter and stuff about like, okay, why would you want to apply I mean, to art in general, but also to books? Why would you want to make it speculative? Why would you want to make it an investment? And I do think that scares me. I see it as like a South Star. Like let's not do that in how we build this platform.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line too, because like rare books, right, have always been a beautiful collector item that people cherish, and that often like wealthy people will collect as like a status symbol. And
Yeah.
and that, I think, it can be okay because they're beautiful works of art. Like art is valuable. But when it becomes like very speculative, and that's one thing.
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, permanence is scary. If you just think about like, we have, so in our publishing tool for authors, when you put your book up into our platform and it becomes an NFT collection, we have like a warning that's like, this can't be changed. Like this, there's like some parts of it can be changed. Like we have like a marketing blurb, right, that goes with your book, and you can change that if you want. But like the description of the book, that is unchanged. The text of the book itself, the art, like that's on IPFS. Like, and they can be upgraded, but not like, you can't erase what it was before, or the fact that it's been updated. So that's scary. I mean, as an author, that's scary. Like, I guess again, it's kind of like physical books. Like if I print an edition of the book and it gets sent out, like if there's a typo, that's it. Or that's another thing that's actually scary about publishing, right? If you've written a book, like how do I decide that it's done, that it's ready? And so that, I think, is scary. And then also, okay, my last thing I'll say on this is like media influence, I think, is scary. Like Sonia, my co-founder, and I think a lot about how important and influential media is in our consciousness, our collective consciousness, in how we behave, in how we understand the world. And we need to be very careful about the media we consume, and where it comes from and how it's filtered. And so any sort of potential change to like how we create and process and access media can have like scary potential. And I would be scared to, I mean, who knows who could use this tool. If I mean, right now, like, it doesn't matter because not a lot of people are using our tool yet. We haven't even launched yet. Like, but if in some crazy universe it became like very widely used, like I could see people using it for not well-intentioned reasons or not well thought through reasons. So
yeah, and I guess that's the double-edged sword with censorship, right? Like obviously we don't want censorship, but then we all have ideas or ideologies that maybe we're like, oh, but except one. Right? Or like, that person, right? Which I think is really interesting, like especially reflecting like this week. Obviously we saw what happened with Elon kind of going crazy on Twitter, bringing Donald Trump back on and all this stuff. And, it's kind of like at a very ideological level, everything makes sense. And then when you zoom into the details, there's so many, like shades of gray, I guess. So, that I think censorship is a really interesting one.
It's very, it's funny. Like when I think about anti-censorship, sometimes I end up like verbally aligning myself with like people I absolutely do not agree with, like people who are like, oh, I should just be able to say that like these groups that I hate should suffer, and like that's not what I mean, but it is, yeah, it's very confusing, and it's very, Sonia and I have also talked about, like, let's think about curation instead of censorship. I know this is the second time I'm bringing up curation, but, like, you know, it's perfectly fine for us to choose the narratives that we want people to see, and to kind of, like, push those more, without having to take away things without people even knowing that it's been taken away, which so often is what happens with censorship. So, but yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah, and actually on that, like, yeah, how would you, I guess, like, yeah, curation versus censorship is like I guess, to solve for that, right? But how would you also use curation, like, you know, this diversity of thought is also really important, right? Making sure there are diverse voices, but it's almost like just like, and I think, like, also an inspiration for, you know, I think at Kernel we always talk about conversation, right? Like, when you talk to someone, even if you have differing opinions, engaging in a conversation allows you to maybe learn from each other, or, like, hopefully reach some shared ground, versus like a debate where you're, like, trying to argue. So it's like, yeah, you know, like, it's like the context of, like, how you consume ideas, like what you were saying before, like media, how we consume media makes such a huge difference. Like, I think, like, consuming media on Twitter really affects how, you know, the point of view you get, right? It's like intense. But yeah, like, going back to, like, a library or a knowledge center, and, like, how ideas are consumed that way, like, that's actually really, I think, interesting. Like, and I wonder, at Alexandria Labs, like, it is like, how do you guys think about community, or, like, how is it something that you're building? Like, do you have like, I know you have a newsletter and a group, but, like, how do you, like, think about building community, or building community with the authors and their readers and their fans?
Yeah, it is kind of funny. So, like, we have this sort of community of people who are drawn to the idea of Alexandria and kind of the ethos of it and our vision for it. But then for each of the books, you know, as we're going to be releasing our kind of, like, set of books that we're going to release one at a time in the coming months, like, we're also looking at, okay, each of these has its own audience, and people who are interested in that book. So we kind of have, that's kind of who we're really thinking about, like, building community for, is, like, the people who are into a book. Can we build a community where the bedrock interest, like, at the basis of that community, is the book itself? And that's where we're really inspired by book clubs, because book clubs are a place where people come together to talk about an interest, which is so cool and nerdy and, like, funny that we humans have been doing that for centuries. But can we kind of create places for book clubs to thrive, but also, like, across kind of global lines? Like, if these books can be sold anywhere in the world, and people, can we, like, find ways to make book clubs that are accessible for people, ways for people to connect over books, and then, but it becomes like each of these is its own micro community. So it is very strange and hard to think about it. And we're experimenting. We'll see how it goes. I'm sure we'll have to have a lot of learning to do about what's the best way to enable these micro communities. But yeah.
Actually, now that you mentioned book clubs, I just, like, you know, just preparing for your conversation, and I was, like, reading a couple of your posts.
Yes.
One of the articles that you've pointed to was this one that was about the radical history of book clubs, connecting us through literature, and I thought it was such a wonderful piece. I'm not sure if you're willing to kind of, like, you know, delve a bit more into it, and what attracted you to kind of share it.
Yeah, I can't totally remember what like specific historical example it was talking about, but they're sort of saying that, like book clubs were a place, I think, for women activists to, like, to get together, and it's just, it's so interesting. Like, and this I love this idea that, like, getting together over books becomes a kind of entry point to activism, to making change. Like, I think that's very cool. And so our advisor, Ken Liu, the sci-fi author, who does a lot of, like, speculative fiction, thinking about potential futures, he made the suggestion to us that, like, if you build communities around nonfiction books, that can often become a place for gathering of like, let's actually create action out of this. He said like environmental activists, for example, like there are a lot of like really great books that people would be interested in kind of getting together around. But no, I just love that idea that like, because I was thinking about like what were the first book clubs? Like, is it like, you know, aristocrats in their drawing rooms like trying to be fancy? Like, no, it's people in a small town being like, we want to discuss this. This is really important. Let's get together. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, and I wanted to ask about because you brought up Ken. Yeah, the Story Summit. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Actually, you recently did it or are about to do it? Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like everything I keep saying. Like, it was an experiment. We knew that Ken teaches workshops for often for tech founders or like tech people who want to work on their storytelling skills, because being able to tell the story of your technology and your vision is like as important as the technology itself. And he offered to teach a workshop with us. And so at first we thought, okay, we're just going to be doing a workshop with him. But then we started to realize that there's like a lot of interest in like science fiction, and there are a lot of people who like want to write science fiction and maybe haven't before or haven't published before. And this also idea of like using science fiction and storytelling as a way to think more deeply about the impact you're trying to have on the world if you are someone who's trying to build something. And so that's what it turned into. It was this weekend in San Francisco where we had writing workshops, we had talks from different people who are building different things and thinking about storytelling in different ways. And we had just like a really great intimate group of people come in who had all different, like there were authors, there were AI researchers, there were founders, students, like people coming in and just like working on their writing and getting together. And that was like really cool. And what we're going to do in the coming months is create an anthology out of the short stories that they produced that weekend. Some of them are like really into it and are still working on like longer pieces afterward, or wanting to submit longer pieces that they've worked on, which I'm really like honored that they want to include that in our anthology. But it just will become kind of an artifact of like, where are our imaginations right now? Like, how do we see the future right now?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful, and then so wonderful to kind of like gather together anyway on such a like beautiful purpose, and then see where it goes. And I think that's kind of like also what Kernel is similar to.
Totally.
I'm just wondering like who, like, you know, because Alexandria Labs is about like books and imagination and storytelling. I'm just wondering like who are those authors for you, Amelie, that kind of like inspired you to yeah.
That's a really fun question. Oh my gosh, that's always so okay. I'm not gonna be able to possibly say like everyone. I'm sure I'll think of people later like I should have said that.
But like that comes to mind today or like right now.
Yeah. I mean, Ken Liu is like, I mean, he's written. So he wrote a short story about crypto like years ago called Byzantine Empathy that I often recommend to people as just kind of a cultural introduction to like how I like to think about how people like to think about like what could be done with crypto in terms of like social impact. And he just does a really good job explaining the technology for people who aren't engineers. And he also has this book called The Bookmaking Habits of, I forget, The Bookmaking Habits of something species, like intergalactic species or something. And it's like imagining all these different forms for books and record keeping and storytelling, which is also really inspiring because it's really fun to think about like how could the form of a book completely change? And that's also something that we would like to think about in the future, though we're not right now because there's too many directions. So Ken Liu is a really big one. Miranda July is a current, like, she's an author, she's a filmmaker, she's a performance artist. I wrote one of my master's like essays on her, and she's just always been one of my favorite authors. Not exactly sure why. She does something with her like narrative voice and her form that's just so it feels like it really makes emotions feel very intense. And it takes these like very tiny emotions and like kind of shameful things or like things that are cute or gross and like and makes them feel really meaningful. And that's the kind of like fiction that I think is really special. God, I mean, who else? Right now I'm reading N.K. Jemisin, who does an amazing job like combining fantasy and like how can we take very fantastical things and think about like what makes us human, you know, what are the kind of underpinnings of our culture and how it's made. Henry James, okay, now I'm thinking about the people in my master's. Like I studied under Tamara Fellini, who is this Henry James scholar that I was so like honored to be able to have her be my advisor when I did my like undergrad year at Cambridge, and we talked a lot about Henry James and just how he would kind of be changing the English language with like his use of different phrases, and reading his books is not like a linear process. It feels very like you're kind of digging in, and you can read his books over and over and over and get so much more out of it. So he's kind of an inspiration for thinking about like if we were to take books and focus on like annotating them or being able to like click on a phrase and see the use of that phrase elsewhere in the book or elsewhere in other books, or kind of like get a sense of like how does it like syntactically kind of repeat from other things or change. That he's a big inspiration for that. And so that is also something I would like to build in the future. But yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop myself before I list like 100 authors.
Maybe this needs like we need you to send us a list so we can do it in the tweet thread.
That's so fun. I love
and we
that.
should ask everyone, because actually some of those the bookmaking habits of intergalactic species, that sounds amazing. I'm definitely gonna look at that.
You should read it. Yeah, it'll take you like 15 minutes. It's so beautiful.
Wow. Okay, that sounds amazing. But I really like what you just said. That I guess like digitizing books too allows you to find the buttons and things that maybe you wouldn't be able to get or not as easily get anyway. Like you said, you'd have to do a real master's or deep dive to pull that out. But maybe this interface that you're building or these like tools that you're using can pull those patterns out. And like, yeah, I think that's really interesting. So syntactically, what do you mean by syntactically?
I was just thinking of like the structures of words being used, being repeated, or so not even necessarily just like matching words, but like matching phrasings or even matching like structures of paragraphs. Or I don't even know if I'm using the word syntactically in the right way, but that's what
it's fine. It makes sense to us. No, it was so funny because I was like, like I think now like I'm just like relating this to my TV watching habits. But like what I do, when you rewatch or like there's like a series or something and there's obviously multiple character threads. Sometimes when I rewatch, I'm like, oh, I just want to follow this one character thread, like, and I'll like skip through other scenes. And I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool if there was a feature that would just be like, I just want to watch this person's character. Like if you were just watching Star Wars, but I'm only watching it from one person's point of one character's point of view.
That would be amazing. I mean, that feels like a big potential for like AR, VR. What if you could choose a point of view or choose
yes,
that'd be amazing.
Yeah, exactly the different endings and stuff. And actually one thing I think too, while we have I think we've got another 10 minutes or so. Very briefly, AI, what are your thoughts? Like, okay, I know it's a whole other thing, but
like,
are you thinking about it? Is it something that you guys are thinking about with Alexandria Labs? Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're thinking about. My co-founder, Sonia, it's her her life's mission is AI. So I'm not going to be able to do it justice without her. But so yeah, like she was working on a PhD in machine learning with language, I think, something, which is like on hold while she's working on this company. But so kind of the original, like, she had worked on companies in the past that were kind of before, without Web3, it was like some of the ideas of Alexandria. Like, what happens if every ebook in the world is accessible and searchable in a way that it can't be? Because Google lost a case against the publishers back in 2013, where Google wasn't actually able to run deep search on the books. It's not allowed. It's why, like, if I try to search like Google Books or Google Scholar, I hit paywalls. It's like very annoying. It's hard to use. They were trying to make things a lot more searchable and to be able to run like really deep like training models on the books, and they couldn't, because they had this like antagonistic relationship with publishers. So Sonia kind of encountered the same problem where she really wanted to be able to use ebooks as the amazing resource that they are with AI, and found that she didn't have the IP rights to it. And so she kind of sees Web3 as a potential solution to that. Like, can we have books if they're stored in a decentralized way? If we even have token models for ownership of even just specifically the uses of them that you need to run search or to train AI using all this text, because text continues to be an extremely important data resource for AI. Can we do that with Web3? We'll see. Like, that feels like that's still future. I feel like we're building this self-publishing tool now. We're releasing these books. We're seeing what we can do. And then in the future, we want to like think about all these different ways that we can take all our inspiration from Alexandria and see what happens. But yeah, that's kind of the idea with AI is like, what if we have so much data? This is like a treasure trove. If we start to get more and more of these ebooks onto our platform, or at least start to somehow get the rights to use them and look into them, like, what can we do with them, both in terms of search for humans and in terms of training for AI? So yeah.
Yeah. Actually, now that you've mentioned this, like there has been like actually multiple times that I've been meaning to like search phrases in like a certain book, and then you're just like not able to do it like via Google search or anything similar.
Right.
It like the only thing that appears is just like those like very famous quotes from that book or from that author.
Right.
And then you're like,
Yeah.
but it was not this one. I wanted a different one.
Or like a piece of the page, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you can see 3 pages if you're lucky, but you can't go any further. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're almost at time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe, Amelie, it'd be great. Is there anything, so what's coming up next for you? What can people get involved in? Is there anything you want to share that's happening with Alexandria Labs now?
Yeah, so next week our very first book is being released. It's called Making Moonshots by Rahul Rana. It's this beautiful book about like building moonshot companies that can really make changes for humanity. That's coming out next November 30th. And so that's like a really special release. It's our first one. It's a special edition. I would encourage people to look at that, or at least like kind of go and like take a peek at the website when it's available, just to see what it's like. And then we also have a fiction book by Ana Maria Caballero, who, if people have been following like kind of literature, Web3 literature, she's a really big person who's been doing a lot with poetry. We're going to do a fiction book from her in early December. And if you're an author, we are kind of building out our wait list for our author publishing tool for when it becomes available later this winter. So feel free to sign up on the site, and I'm also here if you want to DM. But yeah, shout out.
And what's the best place for people to, like, just alexandrialabs.xyz or follow you on Twitter? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, following us on Twitter is where we have the updates. Alexandrialabs.xyz has kind of the overview, and also our like contact info. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you so much, Amelie, for taking the time and, you know, just like walking us through Alexandria Labs and, you know, all the wonderful motivations of wanting to do this adventure and this exploration of different type of way of publishing and a different type of like gathering, I would even say.
Thank you both so much. I can't wait for this podcast to exist. It's exactly the kind of thing that I want to listen to while I'm doing my dishes.
Amazing. Yeah, we're gonna do like a summary that we'll share in our mirror as well, and also upload the recording there. So yeah, very cool. Is there any last words, Fang, that we should say, or
No, I think just we'll be in the next new moon. And,
yes, next new moon we'll have another very special guest on another special journey. But I think like this conversation, there's so many little threads. So who knows? We might have to have you back on and find back on too to dive into the AI side, because I'm so fascinated about that one too. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.